I won't represent you until I'm sure you had nothing to do with this killing at all. That took 10 years, 78 to 88. Finally, I became convinced that this guy really was a patsy. Everything about him was that. So I took him on in 1988 as a client. We went to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. Having lost at the Federal District Court, went to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, and then to the Supreme Court for cert. We lost everything. We didn't have a shot at winning at all. We didn't win. I worked on I got Thames Television because I moved to England. I moved my young family to England in 1981 because I was tired of having my 4-year-old son pick up the phone and hearing threats on his father's life and asking me who those guys were on the beach and who were those two guys over there in the duck blind on the other side of the road, who every time I left, somehow their binoculars hit the sun and they were following me. This is no way to raise little kids. So I left and I went to England in 81. I became a visiting scholar at the Wilson College, Cambridge, and I kept commuting. And they had basically a peaceful life over there. I raised that first family in England. I lived there for 20 years. So, but the more I came back and the more I learned, the more it became evident to me that James Earl Ray was innocent of this, totally innocent of this crime, and that somebody else was very much involved in the crime. So I did the first book in 1995, Orders to Kill. And that put forth everything that we learned up to the point of 1995, which meant the television trial that lasted for 10 days. Hickman Ewing was the prosecutor, unscripted trial, jury chosen from all over the country. It took them 7.5 hours to find Ray not guilty. I thought Hickman was going to have a heart attack. This is unheard of, right? And we had a smattering of the evidence that we eventually got, but was not guilty. Then the doors opened and more evidence and people came forth and the evidence picked up and led to James Earl Ray being met by the King family, by Dexter King. The King family then coming out full-blown publicly asking for a trial for James Earl Ray. He died in 1988 in prison. We failed to get him a trial. 1999, we brought an actual civil action, went on in Memphis for 30 days, 70 witnesses that clearly up to 2003 set all the information up as to how Martin King was killed, what we knew at that point in time. It was devastating stuff. Mainstream media, of course, woefully ignores all of this. They would come in when Coretta was testifying or Dexter or Andy Young, and then they would leave when the heavy evidence and witnesses started to appear. They would just go. Court TV was nowhere to be found, although they were going to televise it, because they were nowhere to be found. It was not reported, not devastated. It took the jury 59 minutes after 30 days and 70 witnesses, took them 59 minutes to find that Martin King was killed by a conspiracy involving agents of the government of the United States, state of Tennessee, and the city of Memphis. And of course, a low-level guy whom we sued called Lloyd Jowers, who owned the grill behind which Martin was killed. And it was Jowers who took the rifle from the shooter and brought it in and broke it down in front of his lover, who finally, 30 years later, finally admitted to me exactly what had happened. And the reason she was quiet all those years is because she thought Jowers himself had been the shooter. But Jowers was the main defendant. That gave us the basis for that lawsuit, you see. Okay. So I ran that story in a book called Act of State, An Act of State. That was published in 2003. And Yeah, this is, thank you. This is that book, and it came out in paperback as well. And it put forward all of the evidence of the trial. The court reporter also put out a book called The 13th Juror. One of your colleagues here has that book. And it has the whole transcript of the trial. Every bit of evidence is in the trial was there. So that was 2003, right? So here we go from 1978 to 2003, and we have an enormous amount of information about how Martin King was killed in that film. And I would have thought that's enough, but it wasn't enough, because all of a sudden, people are getting close to the grave. And if you write a book on these cases and you do it in 3 or 4 years and you get it out and you sell it, you maybe make some money with some of the bravado, you may be doing a service. But if you somehow hang on to a case for 30 years or 35 years, and in this case, really, it's 38 years, and you're there, and you keep going in and out of Memphis, and you know people who've never talked to you before, but all of a sudden they're getting close to dying, and they now have something to say, then more and more evidence comes out. And more evidence comes out when the son of a Dixie Mafia operative who was responsible for bringing the money in from Hoover and dispensing these funds to local people, including people like the Reverend William Samuel Billy Kiles, who died recently, and the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who's still alive, because of services they will perform for the money. And here you have this young boy. He was 8, 9, and he's there, and it's seeing Clyde Tolson. How many of you know who Clyde Tolson was? Huh? Clyde Tolson was the guy whom, as you know, Hoover's number 2, Hoover's lover, Hoover's trusted confidant. It was Tolson who was the guy who came all in and out, bringing the money, working with Frank Holloman, setting everything up. So here comes these new witnesses, this new Dixie Mafia family, and the head of the family died. And now the son is that much older. And he wants to get this off his chest. So he comes to me and he tells me what happened. From his standpoint, he has a particular piece of information. He knows what happened because he rode with his father to the prison carrying $25,000 to the warden of the prison to organize James Earl Ray's escape after James had been profiled. And he was there, his father. And he sat in, he brought the donuts and the coffee, and he sat in, he saw all these things, and he remembered them. And he was down on Mulberry Street on a bike when Martin was shot, and Earl Clark, who was a lieutenant in the Memphis Police Department, came down over the wall and ran up the street to get into a waiting police car to take him away. But Earl Clark was not the killer of Martin King. He was the spotter, and he was there doing his job as a spotter. The killer of Martin King was the best shot on the Memphis Police Department. He was paid a fairly small amount of money. He was an ex-Vietnam vet. Brother was killed in Vietnam. He hated black people. He behaved abysmally in terms of black people in the south side of Memphis. And he was readily recruited. And I had eyewitnesses who saw him the day of the shooting practicing early morning until he left around 3 o'clock at the Memphis Armory Police Department shooting range. And he left in his buddy's car, put the rifle on the back seat, which was described to my eyewitness, who was a custodian, black custodian, as a very special gun. Off he went, and he was the guy who shot Martin King. I had lunch with him. I asked him to have lunch with me. He needs money. So he agreed. have lunch with me for $500. I paid him $500 and we had lunch. He wouldn't eat. And he sat there. And I said, you know, I have some witnesses who say you were the shooter. This is what you did. You killed Martin King. What do you have to say to that? And he said to me, I don't have anything to say to that. I said, well, you know, we got 2 plaster of Paris footprints where the shooter ran back toward an alleyway. It had rained the night before, and they got these footprints. And, you know, and the size of those footprints, size 13. Now tell me, Frank, what size shoe do you wear? He said, 13 large. And he had a little grin on his face. But that's as far as I got in terms of getting out of him. However, I knew another taxi driver for years, 25 years. And I said, I want you, you know, Frank, you know who he is? He says, yeah, he drives a taxi. I said, oh, yeah. Okay, I want you to just get in and confront him, see what he says. Guy got in the back of his car one day and said, hey, I hear they're going to get you. I hear you're going to be indicted. Pepper's got enough evidence on you to get you. And he said, what are they going to get me for? Something I did 30 years ago? I just blurted this out. Something I did 30 years ago? I said, oh, my goodness. So, of course, we got a statement, affidavit statement of that. But he's free. He's walking around. He still needs money. We only paid him $5,000 for the hit on Martin King. But that in those days seemed to be a lot of money, and he was happy to get it. So that it takes us up to a point, and I can't go really much beyond that point because that's in the 3rd book, the final book in the trilogy, which will be out on June 7th. And that book culminates in the most depressing news of all that I have. Because Martin King was not killed by that bullet that he took in the head. And I can't tell you any more than that, except I have the eyewitness details of how he actually died. And that is perhaps the most depressing part of my story with respect to Martin King's death. I don't want to go into that at this point in time. So that's as much as I can tell you. One, about the history of assassinations. Political assassinations are virtually as old as human society. All the ones we had in the 60s were part and parcel. The difference is that the cover-ups that have taken place with respect to the assassination of Martin King, and of course John Kennedy, that our friend will talk about, and Bob Kennedy, and I am today Sirhan's lawyer. I took on Sirhan only when I became convinced, again, that he was a patsy. And I have to tell you that the evidence against him is so much less convincing. What's happened to Sirhan is the end of the Sixth Amendment in the United States, as far as I'm concerned. We have just lost at the Ninth Circuit. We're going to the Supreme Court. But it's clear he's a political prisoner. His own lawyer was under a pending indictment and threw the case entirely. Grant Cooper threw the case, collaborated with the prosecution, made sure that Sirhan would be convicted. The difference is that Sirhan, though profiled like Ray was also subjected to brain and mind control. And we believe we know where that took place and even who did that and how he was subjected. And that's why he has this gap. Every parole hearing I've been at with Sirhan, and I've been his counsel for the last 2 parole hearings, he honestly does not remember a period of time after he was pinched by his handler on the neck